the Dentistry 2.0, new and emerging technology that can dramatically increase your production quality and growth. It is a webinar being presented by the very lovely Dr. Brian Laskin, using 20 years of experience providing dental care to anxious patients. Dr. Brian Laskin's passion is to reduce stress for the dental industry through innovation, education, and standardization. Through his multiple businesses, Upgrade Dental, Digital Nitrous, Opera DDS, and Tooth Apps, and being the author of the book, The Patient First Manifesto, Dr. Laskin excels at integrating technology and teamwork into practices. He plays an active role at several progressive dental organizations, and he serves as counsel to leading dental companies. Through participation at the Dental Standards Institute groundbreaking workshops, Dr. Laskin is giving patients a voice as well as creating important guidelines for emerging technologies. And now it is my pleasure to say, take it away, Dr. Laskin.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Thank you, NDX and Wolverine Dental Society, for being here. You know, I know that it takes a lot to take time out of your busy day to show up to a presentation like this, and I want to honor that and bring as much value as possible. So feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We'll have a break in about a half hour where we'll have a formal spot to pause and ask questions. And then towards the end of the presentation too. But thanks, NDX, for the opportunity, and for everybody watching today. I truly appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen here. So like Jessica said, this is how to leverage technology to dramatically increase your production quality and growth. I feel that efficiency leads to quality, because if we have a plan, we execute on that plan, we're better off. So we're going to talk about some systems today that I've leveraged in my practice to help select technology, to grow technology. And as we're all aware, there's a lot more technology. And when I got out of dental school a little over 20 years ago, I remember I was heavily involved with CAD/CAM, and I was just thinking, boy, it's the pace of technology cannot stay like this forever. And it didn't. It's just been increasing, as we all know, right? And obviously NDX understands that and the quality, or the need for quality education around technology. And so I applaud all of you for being here. Now, I believe today that things that we're going to be talking about, if you implement them, will have a cascading effect to help, obviously your teams, but then ultimately your patients. And that's really why I want to show up here today, is to help you, help your teams and your patients to have a cascading effect that will basically elevate the care that we deliver our patients ultimately. Like Jessica said, there are some companies that I'm a part of, which in full disclosure, I guess, I have founded Upgrade Dental, which is an educational platform, a co-founder of Tooth Apps, which is a platform where we are basically getting access to all the information that disparate systems and connecting dentistry, like we like to say. Digital Nitrous, which is a therapeutic virtual reality platform. And then companies that I've sold, Opera DDS is a product that I created but sold a couple of years ago to Vine Dental. My practice, Lake Minnetonka Dental, I sold to Dental Care Alliance a few years ago. And like Jessica said, I wrote a book called The Patient First Manifesto, and have a podcast called The Patient First Podcast, where we talk a lot about technology, leadership, and how to advocate for patients. So a little bit about my story, because it is relevant. I started off, this was my first practice. Now, I don't actually have a picture of the practice because it was so, I would say disgusting when I bought it, but also so modest. It was 800 square feet. It was basically 2.5 operatories and nothing else. We had a small reception area. I did not have an office. There was no break room. There was a sort of a closet in the back that kept all the paper charts, obviously. And my goal, basically, when I bought this practice, was to be the best clinical dentist that I could be. And I felt that if I would be the best clinical dentist I could be, that would directly relate to my success. So being a clinical dentist, I thought, coming out of dental school, that that it was going to be the key to my success. And at the small practice, at least every day, somebody would come in with a broken tooth, some MODBL pin retained amalgam would break, and I would do a crown. And that was kind of how I got by. And, you know, it was at the end of this strip mall, which doesn't exist anymore. Somebody tore it down and saw, you know, took pity on the neighborhood. But Smoky Superette, which is in the foreground, is even more disgusting than it sounds. And so what I did after being in this practice for about a year and a half was a bunch of dentists would go to lunch across the street from here every Tuesday. And one of the dentists was a master craftsman. He had started the Cosmetic Dentistry Society here in Minneapolis, where I am, fellow Midwestern, like all of you. So he was kind of my clinical mentor. And so I bought his practice that was about a mile down the road. I was on the third story of a medical building, and he was my clinical mentor, like I said. And so I felt like he was going to be the key to my success. His practice was about 3 times the size of mine. We merged our practices together. And for a couple months, it was great because everything seemed to be going well. Obviously, I'm producing, he was producing more. And then there came a time when I had a moment, and the moment where I felt like this. And maybe some of you today have had moments like this, or maybe you're having one right now. But it was very difficult to make payroll. And I was looking at the money coming in, going, yay. And then I would look at the money going out, and I was like, where'd all of it go? Right. And so I did one smart thing in my career at this moment in time. I hired a consultant. And one of the very first things that consultant did was talk to me about taking my appointment book, which was at the time a literal book of appointments. Maybe some of you have some gray hairs like me and have had one of these books before, but we would write it in pencil. And then if somebody would switch their appointment, we'd erase it and write in a new appointment. Right. And this consultant said, well, it's so much more efficient if you can put your schedule online. And I fought her hard, frankly, but then I hired her for a reason. So we did end up doing this, and obviously it was better in every single way. Right. And what's interesting about this is that picture on the left is not from 20 years ago. This is actually the 2023 Patterson Dental Catalog. So you can still order the paper appointment books like this. Now, I say that because you might not think of putting your appointments on your computer as a piece of technology that would give people anxiety, but it absolutely did. In fact, in my career, and I've implemented basically every single piece of technology available, created therapeutic virtual reality platforms, all different crazy technology stuff. This was the single most stressful transition of technology that I had, because it was so impactful. It was so impactful that I obviously was going, well, I just need to do this over and over again. And this small transition is what really has led me down this pathway of incorporating technology into my practice. And the big aha that I had, the big sort of, revelation that I had, was that while I spent a lot of my time, looking at the appointment book, but it wasn't just me. There was so much waste of non-clinical, non-productive work that was being done just in this instance of keeping track of your calendar. And so it was even more impactful for my team's time. They were less distracted. They had less anxiety about the schedule, and we were delivering better care. Like I said at the beginning of the presentation, I truly believe that if you incorporate these technologies, you will deliver better care. So it became a personal passion of mine to leverage technology to do the non-productive things as much as possible, to make things work more efficiently, higher quality by leveraging technology. And that is kind of what led to the balance of my career being spent in personal productivity, business. And I grew my office from that 800 square foot office to this entire building. I've actually had multiple locations when I sold my practices. We grew to this office having 5 general dentists. We had 2 locations, oral surgeon and orthodontist. And the biggest lever that I pulled was technology. We were on the cover of Dental Town magazine. I've created a bunch of different technologies, like I mentioned. And it was just easier to do. Everything was easier through technology. And, when I joined as chief innovation officer after I sold my dental practices, the group that I belong to, and that led to some insights, I think, into incorporating technology into every practice. Because when I joined the DSO as chief innovation officer, the very first question that they asked me was, which technologies should we be implementing in our practices? About 400 practices, which ones should we incorporate? And as I actually mentioned previously, I think, I started off my career early on training on CAD/CAM technologies. And we were the only practice in about 400 at the time that actually had CAD/CAM. So I started off thinking about, which CAD/CAM should we use? Is it, Cerac or Itero or Medit or 3Shape? It wasn't about which technology in my mind. It was about which CAD/CAM system we should use. And maybe some of you are thinking about that right now. And we'll talk about CAD/CAM in a bit too. But, I was kind of looking at it. I'm an electric car guy. Like, which electric car should we get? Tesla, a Mach-E. One of my friends just bought a Mach-E yesterday. It's a pretty cool car. The Ford, or a Lucid, or now there's, Audi, and, there's tons of EVs coming out right now. So I was trying to think, which one of these should we get? Is it the Itero, the 3Shape? Which one should we put in which practice? And then what I realized after going through and talking to these practices, it was a little bit like looking at electric cars when you don't have a driver's license. If you're 10 years old and you're riding a bike, you're not thinking about which EV to get. And in other words, I had an aha moment that it wasn't about which technology is right. It's about timing. Timing is everything. So something for your notes today, when it comes to technology, it's not about which to get, but when. And I don't think people think about that enough. When is it right for you? We are lucky to have tons of amazing solutions, but dentists I see get in trouble putting the wrong technology first, the cart before the horse, so to speak. And just like next year's paper appointment book, right? If you haven't put your schedule on the computer, it'd be ridiculous to go out and buy some new like VR system for your practice. Getting your appointment schedule on the computer first makes all the sense in the world. And we'll be talking about how to select when a technology is right for you today. So our goals for today are fairly simple. Number one, we're going to learn how to use technology to grow your practice. Know when to add the new technology, how to translate the investment to your team and your patients in a way that matters. It's fairly simple, but vitally important. The first person you have to sell is yourself. The second one is your team. And then lastly, obviously, your patients. And before we get started going through the different technologies, I want to give you a thinking tool that I've developed that has hence helped me immensely in making decisions, whether or not to invest in a technology for my practice. And, again, it's about timing in my perspective. The more emerging technologies, if you're not ready for them, as we'll talk about, there's different phases of technology. And so sometimes these are $100,000 decisions and they warrant thinking about. So I'll give you that tool in a little bit. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the people in our industry that we have to help us. Number one, your wonderful lab technicians, the people that you work with at NDX, having the conversation with them. Obviously, they work with all the different technologies. So if you're, I would urge you to leverage, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but the people at NDX, they're kind of like unpaid experts for you. Now, obviously you pay the laboratory for your lab bill, but they see so much. Leverage their expertise. I would urge you to lean into what they know because they know a lot. One dentist's opinion is one dentist's opinion, but one laboratory technician's opinion is probably worth a lot of, they see everything is my guess, your lab technician. But when it comes to the salespeople, like let's say, oh, I don't know, there's a particular CAD CAM system that you're interested in. If you talk to that salesperson, they'll probably be very educated on their solution. In fact, they'll probably be very educated on CAD CAM. But what they don't know is if you have a license to drive a car yet. You might be that, from a technology perspective, you might be looking at a new bike and they're selling a car and they don't have the context by which to tell you, right? They don't know your practice. They don't know the procedures that you do. They don't know your team. They don't know that Linda, that's your assistant, like hates technology, right? They can give you fantastic info. And I work with a lot of people in the industry, both on the technology side, the lab side. They're very knowledgeable people in dentistry, but they can't talk about other technologies that they're not specialists about. Now, your lab technician is probably a little bit different. They probably can. So they probably know more about your practice than the average, obviously more than the average salesperson who's selling a particular piece of technology. And they probably know more about technology in general. But nobody other than you has the context by which to put that knowledge in a framework, right? So I'd recommend you look at it this way, the sort of the cliche tip of the iceberg of information is what you can gather from everybody else, right? Think about what's lying beneath the surface of your practice that is up to you. The salespeople, reps, your lab technicians can give you fantastic information, great information. And I believe everybody's probably looking to help you. If people don't believe in a solution, they're typically not selling it. But it's up to you to provide the context by which this information is appropriate to your practice, your patients, your team, how you deliver dentistry. And that's a vital piece of the puzzle, if this is right for you. And so the way you do that, the thinking tool that I've developed, we call it the cost of implementation. It's an acronym. And so this is how you figure out if something is right for your practice now. So the C in cost stands for clinical quality. How does this technology, this procedure, this new thing that you're looking at, how does it affect the quality of care that you deliver? Second is O, observations by patients. How does this thing that you're looking at, this technology, this new procedure you're doing, affect the experience of the care that your patients receive, which is very different than the clinical quality. This is just, is it more convenient? Is it make their experience sort of less painful? Whatever it is, how does it affect, does it make it take longer, right? How does it actually affect the experience of care by your patients? And we don't usually think about that a lot. So I would urge you to think hard about that. I think this might be one of the most overlooked ones. Thirdly, the S is a dollar sign for ROI. So are you going to get a positive return on this investment, right? That's healthy practice needs to have positive cash flow so you can reinvest and get new technology that will then improve everything else. So ROI is a big piece of the puzzle. And lastly, the T is for team health. How does this affect your team? And importantly, in the context of this conversation, obviously, your lab is part of your team. Your lab is part of your team. So how does it affect your communication with your lab, the quality of care that your lab can produce, which directly affects your quality of care? So I don't want to beat that too hard, but these are the 4 pillars of progress: the clinical quality, observations by patients, ROI, and team health. So a little extra tool about this, I think of the C and the O, clinical quality and observations by patients, are like a light switch. What I mean by that is if the quality of care and the observations by patients, if either one of these, both of these have to be positively influenced. If there's a slight drop in clinical quality or a slight drop in observations by my patients, the patient's experience, it's a no-go. We will not implement anything in the practice if we think there's going to be a slight drop in either of those two. However, ROI and team health usually have to take some type of a hit to have a positive benefit on the other side, meaning you either have to invest time, energy, money, your team has to learn something new. So almost every single investment that you do in technology is going to require some type of investment of time, energy, or money, which will negatively affect ROI and team health in minute one. However, we'll talk about how to calculate this later on, because what you really want to do is time map out what the ROI will look like, because oftentimes a slight variation can be massively impactful. It might be $100,000 investment today, and that seems like it's a big deal. And you gain only a few minutes per procedure. But if you calculated those few minutes per procedure over the course of a year, it's hugely impactful. So we usually overestimate how much that initial cost is and underestimate the benefit over time. So I just, we'll talk a bit about it later on, but cost, the clinical quality, patients' experiences must be positively affected. ROI and team health, you have to calculate over time. I'll just go through this first phase and we can take our first break. But the first phase I'm going to talk about really isn't a phase. We call it level 0. And I'm not going to belabor it long, because it's the very first thing I think is to get your mindset correct. Number one, there's no better investment than investing in yourself. That's why you're here. That's why NDX puts this on. They realize that you're going to do better when you invest in yourself. So kudos to you for being here and recognizing that, right? And why is this considered a technology? I like to think at one point in time, if you think about it, a pen was a piece of technology that people were implementing. And so there's tools that we use every single day, like our appointment schedule, that we might not think about technology. For example, your burr block. This came kind of by accident to me. I was doing a CAD CAM lecture, and I was talking about my burr block that I created over the course of a decade, where I think you can prepare any tooth in less than 2 minutes for usually higher quality than most people are doing today. And I put a lot of thought into it, mainly because I just sort of obsess about efficiency. And I won't go into it long, but people in the lecture were like, well, we want to know what you did. What does your burr block look like? And so how you prep teeth is a piece of technology. It's a procedure that you do, if you do it meaningfully, such that when you prepare a tooth tomorrow, you've planned it out to be incrementally better than it was yesterday, right? So that means that you prep for a tooth, a procedure, the same way every time, unless you have a reason to prep it differently, right? And that goes from practicing dentistry. If you do 1,000 crowns, let's say, just to pick a procedure, are you doing the same crown 1,000 times, such that crown 1,001 is so efficient and easier than crown number 1? Or are you prepping it 1,000 different ways so that 1,000 and number 1 is the same, just done in a different way as the very first one, right? It's meaningful that we plan and systematize our practice. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. There's and kind of along that same vein is that we all know about the different types of intelligence. IQ, which is obviously the intelligent quotient, kind of the horsepower in your engine. EQ, which is your ability to understand, manage emotions, to relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others. It's kind of a management, and that's very popular now, because obviously the generation's a couple younger than me, or probably one younger than me. EQ is a much bigger deal than the greatest generation, so to speak, where it was very much dogmatic and militant on how people managed. EQ's been a big deal. And you may not have heard of XQ, but I think it's a big one. XQ is your experience. What have you learned over time? And the reason why I bring that up is that there's sort of a shortcut or a cheat here. we have our IQ, which is our obviously the horsepower in the engine in our brain. Our EQ we can work on. It's very hard. XQ, obviously it's hard to gain experiences, but the cheat here is that you can hire a coach, a trainer, someone that's done it before, so that you can gain from their experience. And like I mentioned before, this is kind of where NDX comes in. The people that you work with at NDX have massive EQ. I don't care how many, all on X appliances you do in your practice. You're not going to be doing as many as the lab technician who does those, right? It's just not, the lab technician is probably doing that same procedure for many, many dentists. So they have a lot more XQ than you at fabricating these appliances. Obviously, lean on NDX for their experiences, right? And I'm sure they're happy to help you with that. And I just want to mention here now, it's pretty obvious to this group, because Jessica was telling me before about how you guys have leaned into online education. I feel it's a huge way to huge benefit. That it's so easy to gain online continuing education now. It's transformed since the pandemic. And there's all sorts of great, presentations you get, and kind of, selling the soul here because you guys are here at this presentation. But I think it bears mentioning that it is sort of the mindset technology of getting the CE in an efficient way. So kudos to you guys for showing up here. The next, I'll just kind of set up our next level of technology is what I like to say, what's expected, but not what most people expect in a dental practice who are in dentistry today. What I'm talking about with level one, about patients' expectations, is if you'd never been to a dentist before, if you were just walking around planet Earth as an adult in the year 2023, and you'd never been to a dentist, maybe never been to a healthcare practice before, and somebody said to you, well, dentists work on teeth, they're stewards of the oral health. It's recommended that you go in and get your teeth cleaned every once in a while. They take x-rays and do an exam, and they explain to you what the procedure is going to a dental practice. What would you expect in a dental practice? And the reason why I say it that way is that, as you'll see in a little bit, it's very different than the way we typically do things in dentistry today. And I believe there's massive benefits to your practice over time if you meet people's expectations as if you're a coffee shop or an auto body shop, or our sort of competition, if you will, isn't other dentists. It's every other experience that people have with every other business today, which is a very different experience than other dental practices. And that's kind of what my book, The Patient First Manifesto, is about. It's about, in level one, we really have one big goal, and that's catching up with today's consumer, that phone-centric instant gratification. You can order. I just ordered something on Amazon today, and it's being delivered today. And it's probably going to come while I'm doing this presentation. Just blows my mind, right? You can order everything from a house to a car to a spouse, like on your phone within a couple hours, right? Our competition in level one, again, isn't other dentists. It's every business that the patient interacts with: Starbucks, Target, Amazon, Apple, Facebook. And so thinking, how does my office compare to those brands today? And how do my customers, my patients that we're interacting with every day, view my practice from that lens? Because patients don't really look like this today. We know they look like this, right? Their attention span is minimized. And so what are the changes that we should make in our practices and how we do things that can meet that sort of the patient of today that has very little attention span and is looking for things to do mobile friendly. So again, what we're looking at right now is that mobile obsessed patient. And number one is your website. Do you have a responsive website that's secure. So there's a little lockup in the URL domain bar. And you could argue, what does that have to do with the clinical quality that I deliver in my practice? However, I think that websites today are quickly switching from being like a business card for your practice to your digital front door. And so I feel like your website is there to promote all of the things that you do, right? All the good things that NDX partners with you to do. So if you're doing the all on X procedures, or if you're doing, some type of, implants that you restore, and I'm sure that the good people at NDX would help give you content that you could put on your website that would be mobile friendly, but then also some of the other technologies that people expect today. Can they pay their bill online? Can they request an appointment? We'll talk about it in a little bit, but can they send you photos or images of their teeth, right? A lot of practices today don't even have a website, so they can't even be observed by a patient. So if you go from the to the O in our scale, if you don't have a website, people don't even know what you are, right? So obviously the experience of having a mobile friendly website that has that speaks about what your practice is key. And I believe it does provide an opportunity to create higher quality clinical care. As we'll talk about some of the elements that you can have on your website in a little bit, it can actually radically increase the quality of care that you deliver. Same thing with ROI. We'll talk about some things on your website that you can have on your website that then will give patients an easy way to come into your practice, particularly the high dollar volume cases, right? The cases that I know, the cases that I've worked with NDX on before that are massive dollar values, the huge ROI cases. We'll talk about how to switch up your website so that you can capture those patients with ease. And then your team health. The way I like to look at team health in some instances, particularly with their website, is nobody's really proud that the dental practice they work in is archaic, right? People want to have pride in the practice that they work for and with. And so having a good mobile friendly website is a source of pride for your team. And so running it through the cost of implementation, as you'll see in a little bit, higher clinical quality, the patient's experience going from a very difficult way to get a hold of you to making you instantly available, obviously increases the patient's experience. The ROI, this can be done. I mean, I think modifying your website should not be thousands of dollars. This can be done for essentially free. So of all of the things we're going to be talking about, this is probably the lowest cost, or should be, at least in my opinion. And then team health, like I said, even triaging emergencies, as we'll talk about in a little bit, makes it so much easier if somebody can send you a photo from your website, so that on the weekend you can look at that photo on your phone and give the patient an idea of what's going on. It can save your team from having to go in and see the patient off hours. It just makes it a lot easier. So there's a lot to websites, and it's a short presentation. So I'll just say kind of where I started with level one. Think about if you go to Panera's website, if you go to Starbucks website, the types of technology, how easy it is to navigate that website, how sort of clean the website is. It's crucial, I believe, in the year 2023, to adjust your practice's website to be in alignment with the other businesses that people look at on the web, not other practices, websites, but other businesses. Moving on to digital x-rays. It still blows my mind that there's quite a few practices right now that still use film x-rays. But if we run it through, if we use digital x-rays, because my guess is probably everybody on this call uses digital x-rays, let's run it through the cost analysis. Do digital x-rays provide higher clinical quality? I think the answer is absolutely yes. I think back when I got digital x-rays over 20 years ago, this was sort of a question. If you've used digital x-rays, you know that the clinical quality is higher. And if you doubt it, there's newer ones with newer clinical x-rays that have just, I mean, amazing resolution. And of course you can blow up the image. You manipulate the image to get more data. You can take, with less radiation. So the clinical quality is an obvious improvement. Number two, experience for patients. Again, less radiation. When you blow up the image like they show on this slide, patients can actually see what's going on. You can highlight things, you can draw them, you can incorporate artificial intelligence to sort of preemptively diagnose things or suggestions. So that there's both clinical quality and the patient experience is obviously improved, I believe, from digital x-rays. The ROI, again, another good example. You probably have to buy some sensors for thousands of dollars, but then you don't have the sort of chemicals, the film, the ongoing costs. And so the ROI over time is huge. Plus, don't forget to factor in the team time. When we had a film processor, people waiting to develop x-rays would just massively drain time. And if I was looking at transitioning from film x-rays to digital x-rays, I would quantify that time. I would actually see how much time are people spending processing x-rays that they wouldn't need to anymore. And then that is a direct ROI. You can take that time and see what could we be doing instead of processing film, right? And that's what I mean by calculating the ROI. Either you can use the person's wage, which is a poor indicator, or you could say, instead of I'm paying for 15 minutes of film processing every day for per employee, you could also say, well, if we're doing that, then we have 5 employees. That's an extra hour of clinical dentistry we could be doing, right? However you want to calculate it. And lastly, team health. How does this negatively or positively affect the team's health? If you had film x-rays before, like we did, and you bring in digital x-rays, obviously everybody has to learn about how to do this. And it takes a while. You have to do training. People complain about it. But on the other side of it, I've never talked to a team that said, boy, I really wish we could go back to film. Right. And so the reason why I have digital x-rays in here is it's a great example of level 1. It's, I believe, better in every way possible than film. And also it's a good showcase of how we can use the cost framework to determine when a technology is right for us. And I would say that, again, we level these up because if you don't have a responsive website, the tools that the patient would expect today, or if you don't have digital x-rays, I would definitely start there. Next up, we have paperless forms. So this is one of the technologies you could have on your website, but then also you should be able to text or email patients their forms. There's almost nowhere today where they slide you a clipboard other than healthcare. Even now you have you can pay for things with your Apple, with your Apple or Google Watch. So everything is touchless. But when a new patient comes in to a lot of practices today, they slide a clipboard with a form to fill out. And I don't know about you, but I had to fill out a form actually the other day, and there was somebody else there, and we looked at each other and went, I never fill out forms anymore. It's a big one for your team. It removes the boring, mundane work of scanning, trying to read illegible handwriting, shredding. So if you look at the quality of care, going through the cost framework, starting with this C, it is much, much better. So number one, people can fill out the forms at their at home if you email or text them their forms. If they do it on their own device, it actually fills in things like their name, fills in their address, all their common information, just like every other form that they fill out today. And 1/3 of medical mistakes are due to miscommunications. So it reduces that human error of transferring the information to a computer or trying to find a piece of paper. It obviously increases clinical quality. The patient's experience is much better. because they can fill out forms like they do everywhere else on planet Earth. The ROI is huge because you're usually paying less than $100 a month for a product like this. And if you think of all the time, energy, money, even just the paper alone pays for paperless forms, and the team health. It's just, again, processing paperwork in the typical dental practice is a huge pain. And I like to tell dentists, that if they're wondering how painful it is to fill out paperwork, just take one new patient in your practice if you're using paper forms and do the process that your team is doing today. If you have paper forms for your new patients, I would urge you to just take the next new patient and say to your team, hey, show me how to process this paperwork, and I'll do it myself this one time. And you'll probably switch to paperless forms right away because you'll see how much waste there is in processing forms. Now, oftentimes we don't see it. What's going on at the front desk at the business system in our practice as dentists, we don't usually pay attention to what's going on there, but there can be massive amounts of waste that we tolerate because it's our team's time. And today, when it's difficult to find team members and find great team members even more, I would urge you to look at what's going on in the business systems of your practice and help the people out, like make their jobs easier. If you want to attract and retain the best people, they don't want to be processing paperwork. They want to be talking to people. So let's free up our team members to do what they do best, which is take care of people. Moving on, electronic referrals. I know NDX has a laboratory, has a portal you can go to. You can do digital referrals with your laboratory, with your specialist. It is a huge, and collaboration online. It reduces so much friction. You can collaborate with your laboratory, with your surgeon, with your orthodontist, all on one case in one spot. It just gets rid of the PIA of phone calls. And, we're all so busy that taking a phone call is such an inconvenience. And then you play phone tag and it just doesn't. And so oftentimes we don't even communicate because it's such a pain. However, when using electronic referrals and digital collaboration tools, the clinical quality just leaps up because when you have that collaboration, you actually communicate more. And then it allows everybody to provide better care. Patients' experience go up because you'll have the ability to provide more efficient care. Because if you're playing phone tag and doing a bunch of other archaic modes of communication, it can be problematic. And massive ROI, just like paperless forms. These tools are either free, part of NDX's platform, or essentially free. And so it just massively pays for itself. If you factor in your time at all, if you value your time, I would urge you to think about, well, how much is my time worth, and come up with a number, even if it's low. And then as you're calculating your ROI, the S in cost, you can use that number. Even if you just value your time at $50 an hour, which probably is low for everybody on this call, but at least they'll give you a starting point to say, well, I waste 5 minutes a day doing this. Add up 5 minutes a day for every working day over the course of a year, and then multiply, the hours by $50 an hour, and you'll see how much money that you're saving. And it's real, it works. So even if you want to be conservative about it, I would urge you to do that. And collaboration is definitely one of those. If you have to drive across town and have lunch with your orthodontist to talk about a case, what a waste of time, right? Unless you like hanging out with them, then I would factor that in differently. But you're not really then factoring in the true cost of collaboration. And your team health, I can tell you right now, most dental team members are struggling with the way that communication happens and case coordination. So doing it online can be very, very effective. Similar to that is case tracking. This kind of shows, I don't know if anybody here has had to reschedule a patient because something was dropped in the communication and you didn't have something available. Maybe the specialist couldn't place the implant when the patient went in. So they rescheduled them for the next week, placed the implant, didn't tell you, so you had to wait. That's happened in my practice. So having digital case tracking is vitally important too. I'm not going to go, I kind of talked about it. It's very similar to case collaboration, but with a little different twist of being able to see that that case is going to be in for the patient when the case comes in. ROI huge, because again, this is essentially free. And then team health is just anything that you can automate. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. I would urge you to, particularly in today's environment when it's so hard to find people and very hard, even harder to find good people. Anything we can do to de-burden our teams is going to be better. And that includes things like digital case collaboration and tracking, and also secure messaging. Secure messaging, each one of these can be a little bit different flavor of the same thing. However, when you're planning out a case and doing collaboration tools or using collaboration tools, being able to see that the case is coming in, being able to initiate the case and have like a digital prescription, and then have instant messaging, which is what this is vitally important too. So quality of care goes up because you can collaborate with multiple people in one space. The patient experience goes up because you can actually include the patient if you want to in this. If you think about it, if you take a picture like this and send it to your laboratory technician, they're probably, if it's easy like this to just snap a picture with your phone and securely, we're not violating HIPAA here. We're doing this in full HIPAA compliance. So use tools that are designed for digital case collaboration that are HIPAA compliant. And then your laboratory can just say, hey, that picture that you have of, I think this is a number 8 in this image, I can't see the canines, and I'd love to see the full smile. Well, the patient's still in the chair. Snap another picture with your phone, attach it. Thanks, I got what I need. It's crucial. It sounds so simple, but it's critically important. And that T in your team health, when we include your laboratory into the team, which they are, right? We should be including them in all of the communication tools and the collaboration tools that we also have with our specialists and with our team members. So that's level 1. And I'm not going through all the technologies today, so feel free to ask about any other technology that you want to. I'm focusing in on the technologies that will make your communication with your laboratory better. And also, I think the vital technologies that you need today. I didn't even talk about what level 2 is. So level 2, moving beyond what's expected. So now we're talking about the tools that can take you into the top 10%. So everything that I talked about previously, I believe are sort of table stakes. That doesn't mean that most people have them. Most dental practices don't have a responsive website. Most don't use digital case collaboration and don't have secure messaging for communication tools. They do have digital x-rays. But what I'm saying again is for the patients, for your team members who are, again, the first people you have to sell after yourself, if they didn't know what happened in a dental practice, they would expect every one of those technologies to be used ubiquitously throughout dentistry. So again, level 1 is expected, even though it's not the norm. Level 2 is what I think would put you the next step ahead, sort of in the top 10% of dentists. These are easy to implement tools that require a little bit of investment, but have huge ROI and would probably put you ahead of the curve for now. Again, it's about timing. We already talked about level 1. Let's move on to level 2. Number 1 is teledentistry. And teledentistry, I believe, has been the worst publicized technology ever for a dental practice, with good reason why. We had a teledentistry platform at the last platform that I built, Opera DDS, and sold. And so when COVID hit, for about 2 weeks, teledentistry was literally on the national news. I was on news and webinars 6 times a day talking about teledentistry and it was a huge hot topic. The problem was that most people didn't know how to implement it. And even the teledentistry applications, most of them they weren't developed by dentists. So they weren't being used or being positioned in the marketplace in a way that's most effective. So what ended up happening was there was this huge spike in teledentistry, and then it just dropped off. And people are like, well, we can't use these tools to prep a crown. So what is the point? Well, let's go through the cost of implementation. Clinical quality obviously goes up. You can't deny the fact that if you have images and video of the patient remotely, it goes up. Think about virtual consultations like cosmetic consults, dental emergencies. If somebody's outside the practice and they get hit in the face with a baseball bat or with a baseball, and you can take a look and see what's going on and tell the patient exactly what's going on. It hugely improves the patient's experience. ROI is massive, because if you look at a tooth and there's a slight chip on a premolar, and you can say to the patient, oh, I can see what's going on. If there's no pain, it'll be fine till Monday. I have an appointment Tuesday at 9, right? You just saved yourself a loss leading appointment on a weekend, right? So huge ROI. And team health. Again, if you're not having to have your team come in to do triaging, if you can schedule the patient for what they need 95% of the time, which you can with a photo, it's way better. Plus, my favorite with when we're talking about teledentistry is virtual consultations, because what I like to talk about is the patient, and I've had many of them, who's never been to the dentist in the last 30 years. And patients that have large dental needs typically know that they have large dental needs. They don't need a dentist to tell them that their teeth are missing, that half their teeth are broken, right? However, after 30 years, they probably have a lot of shame and they don't know where to start. So they're kind of stuck, but then they're having a life event that makes them think, well, now's the time for me to get my teeth fixed, right? Maybe they won the lottery. Maybe their daughter's getting married. Maybe they just got divorced. Maybe they're going on a trip to Jamaica, whatever it is. I believe large cases, not single crowns, but full mouth reconstructive cases, all on X treatments that NDX is so good at doing. Patients don't just wake up one day and go, I want to go to the dentist. There's a reason for it, but they don't know where to start. So if you can give patients the safe, easy first step, like in the image here that's going through, of just sending in some pictures, and then once you get the pictures, obviously you can't do full diagnostics, but you can look at the images and say, I hear you, Dr. Jones, or Betty Jones. We saw your images. We see patients like you all of the time. And what we can assure you is that we can give you your options in a non-threatening way. We'd just love to, have you come in. We'll get some more information and we'll present your options, and you can decide what, if anything, you want to do. And that is what the $50,000, $60,000 cases, the large cases, patients need that first step into your practice. And we can do that through teledentistry. In addition, you can think about things like TMD, follow-ups, sleep dentistry, post-operative care, care calls, all can be done through teledentistry. And as we'll talk about in a little bit, it's not going to stop. The ways we can leverage teledentistry is going to grow exponentially over the next several years. If you layer on technologies like artificial intelligence to teledentistry, what we can do is going to explode. So I like to say, when do you want to start? Again, this is a when question. And, I can't answer that question for you. I can tell you the tip of the iceberg, but the bottom of the iceberg is up to you. And I also wanted to mention with this, there's teledentistry isn't just sending in photos and pictures and having a virtual consult form. It is synchronous communication. And I wanted to mention, of course, at this juncture, that you can do this with your laboratory completely securely with your patient, with your laboratory, all together. If you're in the same room or if you're in different ways, you can have sort of the virtual custom shade, if you will. That is a great use case for teledentistry. And again, post-operative care, instead of having a patient come in and looking and saying everything's fine, you can do that through teledentistry, triaging, emergencies, TMD, sleep apnea, care calls. And just think about, the codes that we have. being that we have for teledentistry are synchronous and asynchronous, which means kind of like synchronous is at the same time, like this, like Zoom, like FaceTime. Asynchronous are things like paperless forms, and these are combined sometimes. So if you're talking to a patient over a secure teledentistry like this, like Zoom, and then they send you a photo asynchronously, you just want to use the technology that's appropriate for the use case. So you could send a patient a message securely saying, "How are you feeling?" If they say, "Not so great," then hop on a synchronous call. You can combine these to be very effective. And again, don't forget about the team health. It can be hugely impactful for your team, including your laboratory. The next technology I want to talk about is CBCT. And again, we'll have time for questions at the end of the presentation too. But CBCT, if we go through the cost analysis, clinical quality, I believe, is where CT scans really excel. A lot of people, if you talk to a salesperson about CT scans, they'll probably focus on the patient's experience. Like when we talk about digital x-rays and being able to blow it up. Well, I believe that patients typically view x-rays as our domain, right? It's up to us to read the x-rays and tell the patient. Now, obviously, if we have we want to show patients their CT scans because they are cool to look at, but going deep into what's going on, unless there's something that's a finding that you want to discuss with the patient, they're really just kind of thinking that the patient's experience is definitely not negatively affected. It's definitely positively affected, but showing them exactly how to place the implant, they probably don't care that much, frankly, unless they're an engineering mind. However, the clinical quality is exceptional. And if you're doing things like implants or endo or complex cases with NDX, you definitely, I think today, I would recommend having a CBCT scan. And the collaboration with tools like a CBCT scan is hugely impactful. If you send this through one of the other tools I talked about to your lab technician, they can help you design the case out in 3D. It's phenomenal. I believe the only reason why it's not a standard of care is because not more people have invested in it, because the ROI is long-term, because these are expensive, obviously, but you can't, if we look at the first two as being the more critical of the two, you can't discount the clinical quality. It goes up, as somebody that has had a CT scan for the last, I think, 15 years of my practice, I would never practice without one. And so that's kind of why I would recommend everybody get one. We'll talk about complementary technology in a little bit, but one great example of complementary technology is a CT scan and CAD CAM, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can use the two together, where you can do things like, place an implant virtually using a CT scan, then have NDX print off a guide, or you print off the guide and then place the implant in your practice, and work with your laboratory technician. There's so many different workflows that you can do to make the process just easier and easier, more efficient, increase your ROI. So if you do any implants, any endo, talk with your NDX lab to see how you can leverage it to make it more efficient. And I mentioned it before with teledentistry, but I do feel like AI, and we'll talk about AI more in a bit because it's a big topic, but AI is getting layered on top of every technology. It's really just a buzzword, and we'll dive deep into it in a little bit. But particularly CBCT scan is going to be massively impacted by AI. I work with a couple companies, and I know that there's many, many more that are using AI and 3D imaging to do just some really, really cool things. Jessica and I were just talking about this before we started the presentation. So my point is that if you haven't invested in CT scans yet, and you think that, if you look at the the iceberg underneath the water, and you're thinking, boy, now might be the time. I would think that this is one of those technologies that is going to be sort of an expectation by patients to moving from level 2 to level 1 fairly quickly. Similarly as CAD CAM. So CAD CAM, I was a CAD CAM trainer for over a dozen years, but it feels like a lifetime ago. It's a huge plus in every category. So if we walk through it, the clinical quality, 20 years ago, people questioned it. Nobody questions it today. NDX does tons and tons of CAD CAM restorations, and there's reasons why. It just is, the quality is better than handmade crown restorations. The patient's experience is way better because there's less remakes. It's digital. It literally like fits or doesn't fit, right? So the quality is better. So that is a better experience. And whether or not you have the milling in your practice, or you have NDX do the milling for you, or the design, it's still a faster procedure in every way, right? ROI is huge depending on the level, and we'll talk about in a little bit of the CAD CAM that you play at. But the real big downside, I believe, because the ROI is also there. If you factor in time, the ROI is definitely there. But the downside of CAD CAM is the team health. Not after implementation, but it is a complete paradigm shift if you're not using CAD CAM today. So you have to change the way you do things. And so I would urge you to, if you haven't dipped your toe in the CAD CAM pool, so to speak, to make sure that you have time for training. So adequate training for both you and your team. And CAD CAM is a great example of a technology that there's many subcategories to it, right? Do you want to do just scanning only, just intraoral scanning? Do you want to add milling to your practice? Do you want to do longer milling or zirconias or orthodontics, right? And I would, again, have a conversation with NDX, your laboratory, because there's so much that they can do. So you might not have to invest so much yourself, right? If you just do the scanning piece, they can augment with that. Or if you want to do certain, like I want to do posterior crowns, but leverage the laboratory to do my anterior crowns, right? Have the communication with your laboratory to see what works best for them. Because again, you want to leverage their XQ, their experience quotient here, because they're working with so many different dentists in so many different ways. You have to have the context for your practice, but they can help find out what's right for you, particularly when it comes to the ROI. Because as we all know, these systems can get expensive. An intraoral scanning device is a fraction of what an entire setup that does everything can do, right? And I guarantee you that your NDX laboratory has invested a lot into this technology. And again, just like you can leverage their experience for virtually no cost, you can also leverage their technology. So lean on them to make your ROI higher and your team health easier. Again, and it doesn't mean if it's not for you today, right? For you today, it might be right for you down the road, right? We're looking at the cost of implementation to describe when something is right for your practice, right? And so intraoral scanning might be where you start, and then you might go from there. So again, just have the conversations so that you can make the decision that's best for your practice. Moving on to level 4, which is our final level, we're getting in what I like to call as rare air. This is going to put you in the top 1%, right? It's key that you built the base. So I would say every technology, which we talked about before now, I would incorporate before you go to the stuff after this. And I have a video here. I'm going to try to play it because I think it's kind of fun. The sound isn't really important, but I like to think that this is what the level 4 technologies are like, right? This guy was pedaling and he decided to go into a level 4, right? He's doing a procedure, a technology that frankly, not too many people would do. And he whizzes by everybody by not even pedaling. He, obviously is making himself more streamlined and gets by everybody. And in this video, what I like to point out is that this is a happy video. This guy wins, he wins the race, so to speak. He goes by everybody by making this crazy maneuver. However, we all can imagine that there's a video just like this of another person that doesn't go so well, and they end up crashing and dying, or not maybe dying is a little bit extreme, but that they don't have as successful of a result. And that's what level 4 to me is about. It's about, so keep that image. If you see some new technology that you've never heard of before, think of that guy taking his feet off his pedals, and it might get you in that rare air that's positive or negative, right? So cutting edge stuff. And my favorite technology in this category is my favorite because there was a survey that I saw at the end of 2022, where they polled a bunch of dentists and said, in the year 2023, what is the number one technology that you are interested in implementing? And number one of our level 4 technologies is the answer to that question. And it blew my mind because, again, think about the context of where we are. We've come from getting your mindset right, looking at your burr block and how you prep, how you communicate with your laboratory, your website, for God's sakes, which is like table stakes, texting payments and forms. I mean, these things are very, very basic. And nobody said that when they said, what's the technology that you're looking at implementing in the year 2023? What the number one technology was 3D printing. Okay. Which, again, I have a 3D printer. I love 3D printing, but I'm also that weird guy on the bike because I have every piece of technology and way more. So I think it's great. I think that NDX, I'm sure, leverages this incredibly well. And I'm sure that they have all sorts of 3D printers that you can leverage for little to no cost, right? So I would say, again, and I'm look at all the other technologies, and there's many more that I left off in the interest of the brevity for this presentation. There's so many technologies that I would implement in the average practice prior to 3D printing, right? So with that said, there's a lot of things you can do with 3D printing, right? You can make splints, you can make digital dentures, you can do, models and everything that's listed here. We have ceramics. I believe there's now people who are directly printing 3D aligners, wax ups, temps. But again, if you haven't implemented everything else, just ask NDX to do these for you because they have the printers, they can do it. Implant guides, which I don't think is even on this. Surgical guidance number one. My favorite in my practice, by the way, just a tip for those of you that do have a 3D printer, we've done for years whitening for life. The reason why we did whitening for life is about probably 22 years ago, somebody walked in my practice who had bought Crest white strips and they were complaining about them. And I had to sit there for 20 minutes and answer questions about Crest white strips. And kind of my extreme personality said, I'm never doing that ever again. We're going to just give away whitening because I am not going into competition with P&G and they're let's face it, garbage whitening. So we're just going to give away whitening for everybody, call whitening for life. And we'll tighten our recall by telling everybody they have to come in within 2 weeks of their due for their recall. And we never look back, right? Similarly, we do a mouth guard for life program because I got sick of people complaining that their mouth guard costs $800. So instead of your mouth guard costs $800, your mouth guard costs $800 forever. Similar to whitening for life. If you keep a recall, you have your treatment done, we'll reward our best patients by giving them their mouth guards forever. So it costs about $5 to print it off, probably costs $20 from NDX, I would guess. So this is very inexpensive if you're charging $800 for a mouth guard. So a tip for you that have 3D printers is I would use it to basically one great way to leverage it if you're not today is a mouth guard for life program. I don't know of anybody else that's doing it, but it's a good tip, even though I don't think if you haven't implemented CT scans and CAD CAM, this is an additive technology to those. If you're looking to print off dentures and, unless you do a massive volume, but even that, I would get an intraoral scanner prior to a 3D printer if it was me. But well, let's go back and just talk about the clinical quality, the costs of implementing. Clinical quality goes up because we can do things that we couldn't do before. The models are great. I mean, a 3D printed model in my office is much better than a stone model. Looks better. There's more we can do with it. We can create duplicates. The ROI is questionable, frankly, if you're not, unless you're doing a lot of 3D printing. So there is sort of a fun factor, I guess, but that comes at a cost. It's not like a printer for your practice. There's quite a bit of a learning curve too. So your team health definitely drops. There's a lot of effort that goes into a single 3D printer. If you print off 5 mouth guards, there's a lot of effort there. You have to print them, which takes a long time. You have to trim off the sprues and polish them and wash them and cure them. There's a lot of steps into it. And again, this is early technology in my mind, meaning that it's going to improve dramatically over time. And it already is. This is one of those technologies that every 6 months there's a new develop. Like I talked about, before. There's ceramics which are already being printed. There's new resins that are being printed. Soon metals and tissues are already being printed, just not the ones that we have in our offices. And again, my guess is the NDX lab that you work with has options that you don't have because they're using printers that are of a different scale than what you have in a practice. So even if you do have a 3D printer, I would have the communication with your laboratory. What are you guys doing and how can we leverage what we're doing and what you're doing so that we can create better outcomes, have better patient experiences, increase our ROI, and increase our team's health. So again, leverage the XQ of NDX. Yeah, XQ NDX. So that you can leverage these technologies to your practice. Now, I do want to talk about AI because I believe it's being, and this is a little controversial, and I'd love to have the discussion, but I believe it's being leveraged in the industry incorrectly. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's a huge buzzword right now, and this is prior to ChatGPT, which we will talk about. And it's quickly going to be everywhere. And there's, I think that's sort of known now in the post sort of GPT world of the last 60 days or so. But I want to talk a little bit about AI, and I apologize, this is a fuzzy slide, but AI is a buzzword. And anything can be called AI where a computer helps make a decision. But what we're really talking about is the machine learning, the deep learning, where we're using these large databases of information to come to decisions. And why I said what I believe is kind of controversial today, AI is being leveraged incorrectly, is that today, when people think of AI in dentistry, they're typically thinking about artificial intelligence helping interpret radiographs, and usually not in a 3D sense, in a 2D sense. Right. And so if we think about those layers of artificial intelligence from an algorithm, like, so I'll just simplify the layers, an algorithm that you code that helps make a decision. So if this, then that type of information that you program into a computer, or machine learning, which is you're setting the computer off to make its own decisions based on huge amounts of data that you've fed. And that is how machine learning is being used in dentistry today. Basically saying, here's a radiograph. Let's have 1,000 radiographs, or not 1,000, 1 million radiographs read by 1 million people. And we're not going to tell you how to read the radiograph machine learning program. You figure out based on the results how a radiograph should be interpreted. And the reason why that's wrong, and I believe to be dangerous, is that we were trained to read a radiograph, and we can train somebody else who's never read a radiograph probably within a day how to read radiographs. And we know when we need to do something. If you look at a textbook and it says, if the textbook said, we need to intervene for an interproximal caries, when it goes past the enamel junction, into the dentin, that's when we should intervene. And that's what this is what the enamel dentin junction looks like. You can code that into a program and you know exactly what it's doing. Instead of saying, here's 1,000 x-rays or 1,000,000 x-rays read by 1,000,000 different dentists, and then then it's coming to its own conclusions. And what we're now seeing is that that's being played out every day if you pay attention to the tech circles. For example, there's been examples of in police enforcement where officers' biases were incorporated into machine learning, so such that racial bias and gender bias gets incorporated into an algorithm. Right. When I talk to the people who have developed these machine learning programs in dentistry, I ask them that question. I say, why are you doing this? We all know, looking at a radiograph with a high degree of accuracy, whether or not there's caries there or not. So why are you using machine learning? And the response I get is that dentists in Tokyo read x-rays different than dentists in Minnesota, which I believe is a problem. And what that means is that those negative biases, meaning those incorrect, those are getting incorporated into our data sets. And I, I'm not going to belabor this point. Maybe I already have, but that is not, in my opinion, a correct use of our machine learning in dentistry. And that is typically how it's being used today. Doesn't mean that the AI tools that are out there don't provide a lot of value, because they can find things that you might not otherwise see. It's just that we're using the wrong technology to get to the result. We're using a jackhammer to hammer in the nail, right? When a hammer would do. So it's kind of a little bit of a diatribe, but it is important because AI is going to be vitally important. And when you incorporate it into your practice, it is a big piece of the puzzle. So you have to really, it's a nuanced way because I believe that right now we are in the stage of AI that's similar to the dial-up phase of the internet. If you would have hopped on the internet like I did when you had to dial through a phone line to connect, it was a painful process. It didn't look anything like it does today, and you couldn't determine what the internet would be like. However, where we are today is impactful. And I had value by hopping on it now and understanding where it is in the early days, particularly with a technology that is as powerful as machine learning, and really truly understanding the tools that you're using, even if they're not using the right technology for the tool, will help you make good decisions as you go forward. And so that's where I want to talk about ChatGPT, because when people think about ChatGPT, that's, in dentistry, they're thinking of interpreting x-rays. But outside of dentistry, they're thinking of ChatGPT. And I would guess most people, if not some people on this call, have used ChatGPT. And my point here is that I put, a sample here. Oops, sorry, let me go back, where it says, should I drink water with fluoride? And that was my example, just to point out that patients are using this tool incorrectly and correctly. And so it's going to have an impact on your dentistry, if not already. I don't know if anybody here has had somebody come in saying, well, I asked ChatGPT about what you said. They are using these tools. So I believe if your patient is using the tool, we should at least understand the technology. And I'm happy to answer questions about it, at least so that we can answer patients' questions about it. And there's applications coming that will do a lot of the work for you. We've actually at Tooth Apps, we've incorporated ChatGPT-like tools into it so that you can make decisions and think about where I really see the value of these large language models and machine learning coming into dentistry immediately is you can feed an AI tool like ChatGPT the entire history of all research that's ever been done in dentistry and tell it to make some decisions or predictions based on the entire library of publications that have ever been published for dentistry across the world. Just think of the conclusions that if you actually had the time to sit down and draw those conclusions, it can do that relatively instantly, right? Think about the data that we're going to end up getting between medical dental integration, right? It's going to be staggering. And, like all technology, there's going to be good pieces, like being able to draw conclusions from all dental studies that have ever been done across the recorded history. And then there'll be some dangers, which are, aside from like the robot apocalypse that people talk about, it's, dental insurance companies making decisions on our behalf based on AI tools, right? So I believe we have to be educated about these tools. And again, we're in the sort of the dial-up phase of AI. So this is very early on. ChatGPT is just the very first inkling of what's going to happen. It's going to be layered across every other one of the technologies that I talked about today, including websites. I mean, you can, we're doing things where you can actually just type in what you want and we'll generate the image and the content on your website immediately, if you so choose. And that's a simple example of where we are today, not tomorrow. And the tools that are coming down the road are going to be blowing everybody's minds, I believe. So this is a technology, I think, that is additive to pretty much everything in some degree. So we can't talk about technology and without I think without discussing it. Because also, I believe that another big macro trend in technology to sort of keep in mind when you're thinking about the cost of implementing for the T is automation. Team members, again, are hard to find, and they're 50% of the costs of an average dental practice. So if you're thinking about saving money on your laboratory, that's almost inconsequential between trying to save money on the wages in your practice, and harder to find, right? So leverage tools that give you the optionality to automate workflows that people don't even like doing, right? Software and tech is one automation tool, and your lab tech is another, okay? If you think of your lab tech, your NDX laboratory, the technician, the people there, that's a whole resource that you have that there's no additional cost for you to have good communication with them, to lay into their expertise and get their perspective on a new procedure, on some technology, because they probably already have implemented every single one of these technologies in some degree at NDX. So I would rely on their expertise. And then, I promise we're going to talk about discussing technology with both your team members, including your laboratory, and your patients. And there's one simple question. I mean, this is fairly simple. It's like a lot of things. It's easy in theory, but difficult to keep doing in implementing. But the question I think you always want to ask before you talk to anybody about technology. So once you realize that you want to incorporate this into your practice, if you're talking to your team member, if you're talking to your laboratory, if you're talking to your patient, before you begin the conversation, just ask, why should they care? Put yourself in their shoes. If you're the assistant and we're bringing on intraoral scanning, what's in it for the assistant? Is it going to be more fun? Yes. Is it going to make patients happier? Because most people in dentistry want their patients to be happier. Yes. Will it decrease redos? Yes. Well, does the assistant care? Probably. Do they have to sterilize a gooey impression that probably has a soggy cotton roll on it? Not anymore. That's a big one. I would lead with that one if I was selling intraoral scanning to my dental assistant. I just try to think about what do they do with a traditional impression that they don't have to do anymore, and present it through that lens. And the same thing is true with your patients. So if you have a patient and you want to talk about intraoral scanning, talking about, the how you don't have to sit there and hold an impression anymore. Yeah, that's helpful, but you can talk about traditional impressions causing people to gag, right? Everybody's had that experience who's had multiple impressions. Or you can talk about how, the chances of having to redo something is almost zero, because we can actually review the impression in, at a magnitude of size to make sure that everything looks good before having NDX create the restoration, right? And people care about one thing, right? And it is themselves. So position the benefit for each technology and each procedure as a benefit to them. Really try to remove your own bias out of the equation. That's really the key. So something like, we didn't talk about it, but texting payments, which is a big one. People want to pay their bill via text, right? As practice leaders, right, we benefit from the increase in collections, but patients and team members benefit greatly because of convenience. And I believe that whenever you can lean into convenience, you should, because most technologies today are centered around convenience. If you think about aligners, I mean, Amazon has built their entire business on that one thing is convenience. And so when we're talking to our patients, making the care more convenient for them is a huge one. So think about, if you don't know how to talk to patients about a specific technology, talk about it from that lens if you can. And as you add technologies, what I found, just like with myself with the paper charts that we talked about in the beginning, your team will become more and more engaged as you integrate more technology. They'll actually look for, if you talk about technology from the lens of why should they care, and then you actually fulfill that once that technology is implemented, then they'll get more excited about the next one. And like I said, nobody wants to work in a historical dental practice. Everybody wants to be proud of the work that they're doing because they're increasing clinical quality. They're increasing the observations by their patients. You're able to give out more bonuses because of the positive ROI, and you're making their life less boring at work, more fun, more engaging. Their team health is going up. And also remember, for everybody on this call, I would guess that the person that sets the pace on your team is you, right? Your team is never going to be more engaged than the leader. Whoever's leading the practice has to set the pace. A story that I like telling is about Usain Bolt. When he won the gold medal, when he broke the world's record, he had those gold shoes, if you remember. What most people don't realize is that runners who came in second and third also broke the world record. And so at the end of the race, one of the reporters went up to the second and third person who I don't even know their names because they didn't win, but they both broke the world record too. So an incredible accomplishment. So the reporter went up to them and said, "How did you both? We kind of assumed Hussein was going to win because he's kind of widely known as the best runner in the world. But how did you both win the world record?" And the answer, they both looked at each other and said, "We were just trying to catch Hussein," right? So it's up to you. You have to lead the charge. And think of tech like building blocks, right? Some things need to come before others. I believe if you buy a 3D printer before getting an intraoral scanner, you're missing something. And so think about it that way. When you're looking at any technology, again, the salesperson is probably telling you the tip of the iceberg. You have to look at the bottom and say, what's the procedures? What am I actually going to do with this technology? Are there technologies that I should add to my practice prior to this technology? And many of them are additive. Like I talked about before, CAD/CAM and 3D printing makes both more effective. Paperless forms, web payments, new patient intake forms on your website, whether that's responsive, they convert way more new patients than just a traditional website that doesn't have the tools that your patients are looking for. They're additive. So 1 + 1 does truly equal 3. And then, as I mentioned before, when you're thinking about the ROI and your team health, really make sure to map it over time, because the results with any technology typically exponentially get better with time. The technology gets better, you get better, you become more efficient with it, and there's new ways to use it. So if you're thinking about dumping, you're thinking about, well, I don't know if intraoral scanning is right for me today, but I know it's going to fulfill all of the costs. It's going to be better clinical quality. My patients are going to have better experiences. I can calculate the ROI, like Dr. Laskin said, and it's going to be positive. And I think my team will definitely enjoy doing it, right? Just think about a year from now, 2 years, and three years from now. How is that going to be in your practice using intraoral scanning? It will open up a whole nother world of different applications that we talked about today, even things that aren't available today, right? Like we talked about with AI. So you have to realize that the benefit in a lot of ways exponentially grows with each one of these technologies. So think long-term if you're looking at the investment of time, money, and training into any technology. So just to recap quickly, because I'd like to get to questions. Start by mastering your personal and collaborative productivity using those tools that we discussed. Question isn't if a technology is right for you, but when. When is it right to incorporate? Take the crawl, walk, run approach. Add the fundamental technologies first before you do the supportive tech. And I tried to map out some of these, some of the technologies today. Evaluate all technology, and I would even say a procedure, something you're looking to add different to your practice tomorrow, which is how I kind of define technology, something that you're doing differently to try to make improvements in your practice. Evaluate everything through the cost framework. And then when communicating to other people in your practice, whether it's your laboratory, whether it's your assistant, whether it's your business team, or whether it's your patients, what's in it for them? Thank you very much.